Hi there, and welcome to today's webcast with Montana's Trust Lands Management System. The presenters today will be Sarah Lyngholm from Montana DNRC and Emma Dixon from Sitka Technology Group. The agenda, this is kind of what you saw when you signed up. We're going to just talk about the Trust Lands Program overview, the business analysis that was conducted, the phased rollout approach, the production launch that's underway. That actually is, and then Emma's going to do an online demo, and then we're going to kind of talk about the lessons learned and open it up for Q&A. Let's see, I had a little. So I'd like to introduce Sarah. Sarah graduated from the University of Montana School of Forestry. She worked for the Forest Service and Plum Creek Timber Company prior to starting with the state of Montana's Department of Natural Resources. At DNRC, she was a forester and forest planner prior to becoming the statewide coordinator of Montana's Trust Lands, forest product sales, and revenue. When she's not at work, Sarah enjoys exploring Montana's open spaces with her family. And then the other presenter today is Emma. Emma is a product owner at Sitka Technology Group and works closely with Sarah and the team at Montana DNRC. She graduated from Brown University with a BS in Environmental Science with an urban ecology focus. After graduation, she helped launch a garden education program in her hometown, I believe, right? Of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And she worked to improve operational insight and data governance in New York for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. And then she recently, about a year or two ago, year and a half ago, she moved to Portland and started working for Sitka Technology Group. But with that, I would like to welcome both Sarah and Emma, and we're going to hand it off to you, Sarah. And I'm going to give you control, too.
Thanks, Damon.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm going to start with some concepts, and then Emma will show you sort of the nuts and bolts of this project. These are the 3 overview questions that we ask ourselves, and I'll cover in a little more detail over the next few slides. So when I started at DNRC, our current system was new and exciting at the time, but after about 15 years, what we have now, our old system is probably pretty common for a state government accounting system. It's older, it's working, and many users are comfortable with it, but it's pretty inefficient both for data management and for our front-end users. We didn't have any spatial representation of our land management footprint that was easily tied or accessible to our revenue information. Next slide. There we go. And like other Western states, Montana has trust lands that generate revenue for schools and other beneficiaries. In Montana, we have about 5 million surface acres and about 6 million subsurface acres of ownership, and it's spread throughout the state. I'm specifically focused on forest management, and that includes about 800,000 acres of the surface ownership that we have. Some other important features that will come up when we talk about our data challenges are miles of road that we track and stream information. Those are just 2 examples of spatial information that's really valuable for us here at the department. Next slide. There are a number of areas where we thought we really could improve, sort of dependent on what data we were looking at. But for example, like most large forest owners, we've been challenged to keep reliable and updated information on our scattered lands that have a whole variety of forest types. As everyone knows, trees are growing, we're managing some acres, there are wildfires. Nothing is static out there. For the data we do have, both from our own sources and external sources, there are some challenges to how we consume it. We can't expect all our users to be GIS experts, and there's almost so much information that integrating it becomes a little bit overwhelming. Next slide. So we boiled it down to basically 3 goals. To first define what we have, second, to integrate our various data sources, and thirdly, to find ways to effectively consume that valuable information. Next slide. Under that umbrella, we have a lot going on. And just a side note, I'm not a GIS data person, so I'll do my best to kind of summarize. We're using ArcGIS Online to manage our data. We have our field folks using the Collector app from Esri and some other tools that they use on iPads to collect information in the field. And we've tried to look ahead to the best way to store all of that data because of the high volume and constantly updating nature of it. So for example, next slide, please. This is some of our data that we're talking about. The first 4 bullets are the information that we were managing in our old system called the Trust Land Management System. There are thousands of customers, thousands of tracts of land, many contracts, and thousands of receipts. About 30 to 40,000 receipts come in each year into this system. And then on top of that, we have millions of spatial records. So those are the layers of parcels, roads, streams, forest stands, management units, and other delineations of activities that we're doing out there. The current system we have tracks the revenue from all land management activities. So in addition to the forest management, our Trust Lands division houses activities under different bureaus. So we've got ag and grazing, we've got minerals, we've got real estate. And then the TLMS system also serves the entire department for our deposits. So every payment coming into the Department of Natural Resources goes into the TLMS system to track that money. And we just have the other divisions listed there in that second to last bullet: Forestry Division, Water Resource Division, Conservation and Resource Development divisions. And then lastly, the last bullet, just wanted to mention we have that spatial data coming in from the field users that we want to integrate with all this other information that we're already tracking. So to summarize, just many data users, a whole variety of needs. And let's move to the next slide, please. What we really wanted was to meet those needs with an integrated system that helps staff and eventually the public access all the data that they need. We want to keep the data up to date, deliver information quickly, and have it be widely available. So basically, just to put all that growing spatial data together with all the accounting data and serve it up to users in a clean way. Next slide. And we knew that we couldn't necessarily do that alone. So some things we understood from the beginning were internal questions that might be different for other organizations, what we could do internally, and then where we needed help. I think we recognize that the environment is constantly changing. Technology changes rapidly. We might get new policies, and of course, personnel turns over. So all of these influenced our direction for the project. Next slide. Let's see. Jumping ahead, we're now in the midst of this project of what Em and I are kind of discussing today some more. This is how we're getting what we want. What we did was break a big, long project into relatively bite-sized pieces. The TLMS 2.0 project is 4 phases over 4 years, and it has a price tag of $2.5 million. But the first phase is what we've called the minimum viable product, and we recently completed it, and now we're using it. It's live. And that first phase included financials and forest management, but maybe less obvious to the user is all of the infrastructure to support the system. Phase 2 is in development now, and we have several more phases lined out. Let's go ahead and look at a quick timeline of this TLMS 2.0. So back in 2016 and 2017, we knew we needed to update our information system, and we started with a business analysis. We wanted to clarify and document our business needs before moving into development. The procurement process, I'm going to kind of breeze over that. We followed our state's process to request a proposal and eventually contracted with Sitka to do a business analysis. In 2018 and 2019, We took the results from the business analysis and issued a request for proposals for the new information system itself. And again, the contract was awarded to Sitka, and we started development work. And now here we are in 2020. TLMS 2.0, as I mentioned, is live. The time that's being spent now in the system is spent on user support, incorporating feedback, and a few bug fixes. And then concurrently, the development side is continuing. So Sitka is building the next phase of the project with real estate and more finance components, and that'll be rolled in when it's released to what we already have live. So with that, I think we're going to get into some more of the details about development, and I'll hand it off to Emma.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, there was a data analysis phase, and I think this is what has really set us up to have a mutual understanding of needs and goals. Typically, our data analysis offering is not just an opportunity to sort of collect a bunch of information, but also an opportunity to give everyone a voice, to bring all the stakeholders to the table and help generate buy-in so that there can be a mutually understood set of goals. So sort of the high-level goal for the trust lands management system overhaul is really to serve the mission of trust lands management as a division, to maximize long-term revenue for state trusts through the sustainable management of state trust lands. So sort of the objective that would help meet that goal is, as part of this data analysis, was to create this vision of where trust lands management as a system could improve and could better support the goals of the division going forward. So a few strategies, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there's a lot of different components of a data analysis that help you sort of get to an actual roadmap for how you're going to get there. So the first one is really understanding the people, who's involved. And so this is really just a subset of the personas that were identified. So personas are sort of a broader, it's not a job title, it's not a job description, it's kind of what's your overall role in the system or in the division even. So like a bureau agreement manager has sort of a high-level view for a specific area. So they're sort of focused on forest management, for instance, sort of doing those interactions with customers and setting up sort of long-term agreements. A bureau specialist is going to have a little more deeper technical awareness, sort of focused on the details of specific agreement types or specific contracts that you might have on trust lands. Your field manager is more on-the-ground operations focused. A division or bureau chief might be more focused on strategy and vision. Finance lead is someone who's going to be interacting with everyone really and has broad responsibilities across all the bureaus, but isn't really diving deep into the details of how any individual piece of land is being used. They have sort of that high level, where's the money going? So understanding sort of everyone is going to have different priorities depending on their personas. So the next step is to really identify all of the tasks that everyone is doing. So we have a couple of different ways that we approach this, but generally there's a process of sort of bringing everyone into the room with a list of tasks that we've all agreed on, and saying, okay, for different personas, what is something that you are doing really often? What is something that is really critical, even if you're not doing it as often? Where is there room for improvement? And this helps not only to identify what should be included or not included, but also the degree of sophistication. So something that a few people need to do a couple of times a year might be a little bit less sophisticated. Maybe you just upload a spreadsheet rather than having a direct database connection to bring in data. where it's something that someone is doing every day, like there are cashiers in the system every single day entering checks in real time in large volumes, so that needs to be something that is very performant, very easy to use. So then moving up from, you have sort of the personas and the individual tasks, and you start to sort of look at workflows. So, for accomplishing a large task, like a land banking sale, for instance, you're going to have a lot of different personas involved, including internal personas, some of the ones that we already looked at, as well as some sort of customer personas, the land board. You have a lot of different stakeholders, so helping to understand who's involved and what all the different steps are, which other systems you're interfacing with potentially, what data needs to come in and out. And this is really helpful to come up with an estimate for what it's going to cost to implement these workflows, but it can also be a really important internal tool. So if you have a process that maybe isn't really solidified, this is a good opportunity to sort of bring everyone together and create an ideal vision for the future. How do we want to do this process going forward? Where do we maybe need to spend a little more time internally to figure out what we want this process to look like? That way, when we're building a new system, it supports, our ideal process rather than maybe sort of what we've been doing because that's what our old system supported, right? So it sort of can turn around the emphasis from, what we've been doing because that's what was possible to what do we want and how can we help support that. So the last piece of the analysis that I'm going to talk about is creating a high-level data model. So increasingly, sort of enterprise-level systems don't just exist to capture your information and to give you tools for your everyday job, but also as a store for information about everything that you're doing, everything that's happening on trust lands. So while, of course, ag versus minerals versus real estate versus forestry, they're all going to have different business processes, different people involved. There are common entities that we want to be able to roll up information on. So a huge part of this process is identifying what is shared and what is really particular to an individual process. So everyone's working on trust land, so that those tracts of land are really critical as a shared entity. Everyone has some sort of agreement, right? Whether it's an oil and gas lease or, somebody is renting storefront property from the real estate division, or there's a timber sale. They can have really different sort of contract structures and payment structures, but they're all sort of an agreement between the state and a third party to use the land. So the last piece, and so once we had that understanding and responded to the RFP, then we can get to building, which does not mean that we were done with analysis. It's sort of a key part of the approach. Sarah alluded to the fact that there are multiple phases, and it's also, breaking it up into phases makes it a little easier to digest, but also means that there's opportunities to continue the analysis. So the data analysis phase sort of gave us a broad understanding of who needed to be involved and when and the relative complexity. But it wasn't I didn't disappear and come back to Sarah and say, here, we're done with the forest management workflows. It was a constant sort of feedback loop. So I'll highlight a couple of places where we actually learned as we went on this. All right. So.
Transfer over to that other screen.
Okay.
Yeah, like the other.
Do we have any questions you wanted to?
Basically, one of the questions that came in was how long did the analysis project take?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Sarah, you were actually more involved with the analysis than I was. I hadn't started yet, but I think it was a few months from start to finish. Does that sound about right, Sarah?
Yeah, and it was an intermittent thing where we would do a really intense day as a group, and then the contractor went away, worked on stuff. I think So, you know, off the top of my head, I was going to say about 4 or 6 months, but within that, it was just little pieces and parts.
Yeah, so that's typically how it would be run. Is there's a few intensive sessions where you're bringing everyone together, and then a lot of you know, Sitka doing the analysis, pouring through the artifacts that have been provided, and you know, sort of coming up with some ideas. Usually there'll be a few sort of core stakeholders who will be reviewing initial drafts, and then a bigger group of people who will be more involved in kind of like a card sort where you're bringing everyone in and having them prioritize. So, and it can go faster or slower, sort of depending on the capacity of the customer to engage as well. You know, we're aware that most of you have full-time jobs that are not helping support the recreation of a software system. So.
And before you, this one might be better to wait till the end, but I'll just ask it and you can make that decision. But another question came in is, do you have ongoing support? And how much does that cost, and how long do you think you'll need that?
Okay, so that's a good question. Montana's hosting their system themselves, so DNRC's IT division is actually the one who has all the infrastructure for the production version of the application. So that is potentially structured so that there wouldn't be a need for ongoing support. Right now, of course, we're still under contract and still developing, so Sitka is handling sort of the bugs that come up and just quick feedback, whereas the IT division is handling more like if users need permissions that they don't have, or sort of on-site configuration, but that would definitely be something that if you could host it in the cloud or on Sitka's servers, and that would be something where we would have an ongoing support. So we can talk a little bit more about that at the end. But that's a good question. All right, so I am logged in. So Heartwood is sort of the code name for this project. So this is the development site, not the real site. So you'll see some fake data in here that has my name all over it. And I am logged in as a forestry administrator, just so you sort of know my permission levels. So the sort of top level menus and these buttons that sort of take you to the common tasks are a good sampling of what is already in the system. So we have a couple of buttons here that are they sound a little general, but just so we know, there's really only forestry in here on the trustland side. We have some finance features, and then we also have some actually non-trust information in here as well. So this is something that we've started supporting, was the Good Neighbor Agreement. So that's timber sales on federal lands. But let's go ahead and jump in here. So some of you I know were at the demo that we did last summer, so I'm gonna try not to repeat myself too much. But I think there's some cool stuff that we're gonna wanna see. Uh-oh. My button is hidden because of the way the screen is set up.
Oh.
I can't get to it.
Do you want to make it smaller, maybe?
Okay, well, we'll just we'll jump in here. So this is a map of all of the trust lands that are here in the system. Let me zoom out a little bit so we can actually get to here. See a little bit more of the map. So we can click through and look at individual trust areas. And now we're too small, so let's zoom back in. And see sort of which agreements are happening here on this parcel of land. So like I said, we only have forest management in here now. We have some placeholders. So this is sort of a place where we're going to be building out as we bring in real estate. You would see maybe some of the purchase history for this plot of land, any leases or rental agreements that are happening on it as well. And in general, on any individual area, you're not going to have that many different types of use, right? Because if it's a forested area, you're going to have forestry agreements. But there can be overlapping use of any given piece of land. So let's go look at one of the agreements, which has a funny name, Timber Saddle. So this is, I think, the first new timber sale that was entered in the production version of this app. It's a really exciting one because it's kind of complicated. So I won't walk through too many of the details of how a timber sale is created. I think we spent a little bit of time on that last time, but if anyone has questions, definitely ask me. So one of the key things that came out of the data analysis was that there needed to be a lot more geospatial support. We're talking about land management, right? And if you're not really grounding it in the geography of the land, it can be a lot harder for people to really know what we're talking about. So I think timber sales are a really good example of where we have a couple of different types of areas. So these represent harvest units. So we have two, looks like three, but it's actually just two different shapes here. And this is something that these harvest units are meaningful to the people in the field. They're meaningful to the customer. They are sort of along real geographic boundaries. So if we turn on the terrain in here, you can kind of see that one of these is on sort of flatter ground and one is a little bit steeper. We've got a little more of a slope, so that's probably why these are delineated this way. If we go look at their attributes, we can see that, yes, so one of them is, this one is a little bit flatter, so you can use a tractor to get the timber off. This one's much steeper, so you're using a skyline. And so that's really meaningful to, the logging company that's going out there, to the forester that's managing the sale in the field. But the reality is that we need to also know sort of how it intersects with these trust areas, which are not real geographies, right? They're sort of squares that were drawn out by surveyors a long time ago. And that's where a lot of the geoprocessing comes in. So we are actually intersecting each of these harvest units with the trust areas that are, we'll turn that on so you can see the borders, that are underneath. So this trust area actually has two different trusts that it's benefiting, University of Montana Western and Montana State Eastern. And that is actually a good case of an example where we learned something as we went. I think initially we had understood that each trust area would sort of only benefit a single trust. And as we found, there are actually a lot of cases where, maybe I think this was initially one trust. It was the state normal school, and then got split into two, but the land still belonged to essentially both of them. So that's going to have a 50-50 split. And then similarly, as we've been learning more about real estate, they have restrictions. If you sell a piece of trust land, you have 10 years to reinvest that into new land, and sometimes you don't have enough money to buy anything that's on the market. So you're going to pool multiple trusts, and then you're going to have a different allocation there. So what this is really getting at is ultimately how is the revenue from this sale going to be divided? So the loggers that are coming out here, they know which harvest unit they're in, right? They know which part of their sort of mapped agreement area they're in, but they aren't necessarily tracking, okay, now I've crossed this invisible line into a different section that benefits a different trust. So we're sort of doing that work here, where we're saying that the lumber harvested from this harvest unit is going to be split up. This is a good complicated one to look at, going to be split up into 4 different pieces here. So they're all different sizes just based on their proportion that makes up each harvest unit. So I'm going to pause a minute there in case we have questions. The most complicated part.
I don't have any questions at this point.
Okay.
So
Let me know if you do.
I will do so.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and look at the agreement page now. So where this really becomes important, right, is like I said, the revenue. So we're going to create an invoice. So our logging company's out there, they are hauling logs, taking them to the mill, recording, for those of you who aren't in forestry or don't use truck tickets. I didn't know about truck tickets before, but each truck is going to have a record of how much it was hauling. So I have a few truck tickets here that I can add to this invoice. So I'm just going to take all of them. So our early January truck tickets. So this is the actual amount of timber that's been harvested during this period. So we've got saw logs from both harvest units. And then if we come in and look at sort of where that revenue's actually been allocated, now for each truck ticket, it's splitting out across those different trusts that we had. So there's a summary up here at the top. So this is ultimately what is going to plug into the finance side of things. So the person who's managing this agreement has created the invoice. They've looked over these allocations. It looks right to them. They're going to finalize this. And they would print it out. And this is what you would actually send off to your customer. So they know how much they owe you. They don't owe you anything right now because they've already sent you a check. But, so that's sort of the bureau side of the process. And then where the finance connection comes in. So down here, now that we've finalized this invoice, we can apply a receipt. And this is somewhere where I know that not everyone has their sort of land management and their financial systems as tightly integrated. So in this case for Montana, the cashiers are actually entering their receipts right here in this system, but we could also be reading in records of payments received from an external system. And that was sort of our understanding of what we would do initially, is that that the cashiers would still be in TLMS1, but as it turned out with the schedule, we actually finished integrating the cashier receipt entry before we went live, so we never had to use that connection, but we did design the system so it can read in receipts from somewhere else. So once I apply a receipt, we have a receipt here that's been entered on this agreement. So I'm going to apply this amount. So it's only applying that $32.40 that's actually on this invoice. And if we go look at this receipt now, it has sort of one line item for each of those line items on the invoice. And this is going to have all of the account and funds. This is all of the sort of accountant-y information of where this actually is going to go in Montana's sort of bookkeeping system. This is kind of the end of the line for this revenue. Now it's been apportioned and it can be distributed. Okay, so this is a receipt that's been entered for forest management. So as I said at the beginning, I'm logged in as a forest management admin, so I could come in here and say, okay, we're done with this sale. I'm going to assign it to a different sale. I think I can do that. There we go. So these are going to be all the open sales. I can do whatever I want with this one. Sort of cut off here on the bottom. Okay, well, it's cutting off my submit button, but there's my submit button. But I can't, so this is where the integration with TLMS1 is. So if we come look for a receipt that is, for instance, we'll find the fake receipt that I entered under my name for ag and grazing. So ag and grazing are still in TLMS1. So here's this one. So this one is going to have an alert that this receipt has been sent to TLMS1, and this is sort of where the connection is between the two systems. And we have at various points throughout the development cycle sort of changed where the connection point is. So as I mentioned earlier, at the end of phase 1, we had just done the forest management workflows. So the plan at that point was to write receipt records from TLMS1 here into TLMS2 so that forestry could consume those receipts. Now, because finance is in TLMS2, instead the receipts are being written back to TLMS1 for ag and grazing, minerals, and real estate. And as we're sort of moving forward with phase 2, once real estate is here in this system, then their receipts will no longer be written back, and instead it will only be ag and grazing and minerals. So sort of as we bring new people in, there's less and less data being transferred between the two systems, and we are sort of trying to minimize those transfer points so that there's fewer opportunities for sort of a mismatch or for anyone to get confused about what's happening in which system.
I have a question.
A question?
Yeah.
Yes, Damon.
So a question came in from one of the listeners. Does the database include environmental requirements, constraints, that can be incorporated in timber sale contracts? Related to this, does the system define and track environmental performance metrics, such as percent disturbed soil, temporary road restoration?
The short answer is no. We haven't been tracking any of the sort of environmental metrics. There's no reason you couldn't add those to a timber sale really easily, though. I think sort of the way we can go look at the timber sales again, but the way that we have set up sort of these sale detail pages is that there are all of these sort of individual components that make up a sale. So you'll have the customer, some details about the products, you'll have their use areas. So it's designed to be really modular so you can add new components. So for instance, the Good Neighbor Authority version of timber sales was initially copied from the Trust Lands version, but has a couple of other components that are a little bit different because it's on federal land and they have different reporting requirements. So it's really easy to incorporate sort of a new table that's capturing new information about a sale, and that's a structure that we're planning to leverage as we bring in real estate and the other bureaus as well, is that you're always going to have sort of some of the same basic information. Where is this taking place? General description, when was it established? But that all of these sort of subsequent panels and pieces of information are going to be really specific to the agreement type.
Thank you.
All right. Come back. All right, and let me know if there's anything you want to jump back and look at.
Okay, so now I think we're kind of moving into lessons learned. So I don't know if you want to continue, or maybe Sarah.
Why don't I let Sarah go first? So this is we are now in production, and we've been working on it for a year and a half. So I think both sides have learned a lot, and I'll let Sarah talk first.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, these things, I think we maybe thought about them at the beginning, and then it was really came to ring true and still is. One is generally that you get out of this what you put into it, and the more work we've put in either in the business analysis up front or in being very responsive to follow-up questions and working together, the better things have gone. We've had to be transparent with some of our limitations internally, what we're able to do and what we've needed to.
Sarah, I think you may have cut out there.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. So we can hear you.
I don't know if you missed any of that, but basically you get out of it what you put into it. And with one heavy decision, for example, was where to store data, and we could have done a better job solving that up front. I think it delayed us a little bit. So definitely being very responsive and not being afraid to get together and solve these problems is certainly paid off where we did that instead of delaying decisions or kind of saying that we would figure it out later. Agile works. It's really great to be in the production environment and getting user feedback, and also having the developer available for support. I would definitely say that was a lesson that rang true. And just that, it's been several years that we've been working on this, and we know there are more to go. So having kind of the long view has been very, very helpful.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think we've learned a lot from this process as well. The big one, we already know this, but it's always worth reiterating that the business experts, the people who are actually the most familiar with their workflows and with their needs, are really critical. They need to be involved kind of from the beginning, which I think correlates with Sarah's finding about being willing to fully engage. I think sometimes there's a temptation to, either sort of let internal sort of IT folks handle some of the discussions, or kind of higher level kind of administrators, but really it is critical to have the perspective of people who are very familiar with what needs to happen. They're going to know a lot more of the details about sort of just little restrictions and little rules and things that would make their jobs easier. And it's really great to have them buy in as well. Another lesson that we learned was that we need to be willing to make really big adjustments. This is an agile process, but it's also, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, it is a government contract where there is some expectation that you're laying out what you're going to do ahead of time. I think that's true for most contracts, but that sometimes you need to change the plan. To bring in something earlier that seemed like you could wait, but it's become critical. Or in the case of forest management, we had something that we were going to work on for them this phase that they realized, internally there wasn't as strong a need for it as there was for another piece of functionality. So we swapped that out. And that can be, I think, kind of scary. There's a lot of considerations for everyone, but it can also be really helpful to make those changes and help support what the biggest needs are, rather than what sort of everyone thought the biggest needs were going to be. And then lastly, I think this was a big lesson for me coming from, previously I worked in change management in city government. And so I tend to take that lens that I'm always like, oh, but this could be better, this could be better. But that sometimes you really do have to just meet people where they are. That especially when you have a big group of users who kind of already know the existing system, you don't want to change it too much, even if you think, well, that doesn't really make sense. That there are some people who are really excited about change, and working with them to improve what can be improved is really critical, but also sort of providing stepping stones from an existing process to a new process, so that nobody feels like they've just had the rug pulled out from under them. And right, most people want to just sort of keep doing what they've been doing with incremental improvements. So that's been a lesson for me as well.
Great. And so I'd like to open it up for question and answers. I do have one that's in queue. So if you do have a question you'd like to ask either Sarah or Emma, please feel free to either use the Q&A option on the screen, or you can also use chat, whichever is easiest, so I can monitor both. But one question that came in was, what about their existing data? How do you handle that? How do you work that in? How do you I'm assuming, how's the import handled?
Yeah, so obviously there is an existing TLMS system that has 15 years worth of data in it, and nobody wants to lose that. And so we've actually built sort of the process of creating new interfaces around the existing data and making sure that we can support bringing it over. There have been some times where the data model is really different. You know, either because there's a limitation in the old data model, or the process has just changed enough in 15 years that sort of the initial version wasn't really serving people's needs. So for the most part, all of the sort of legacy data is in the new system and can be edited and worked with. There are a few cases where we had to say, okay, we can bring it over, but it's view only now, because it's different enough that we can't continue to edit it in the same way. So I think it's a balance depending on sort of what existing data there is, but that's something that I think Sitka has a lot of experience with. Most people do want to hold on to their data and be able to report on it. And similarly, I think we haven't had to leverage this too much, but one of the features of this application is that it has sort of a separate reporting environment where there are views of the data that could be, right now, since we have been able to bring over all the legacy data, they're mostly reading from the new database, but they could be reading from both. So if there is data that couldn't be migrated, you could still access it in one place. So that's kind of one of the core guiding principles, is that you should always have access to your data.
While we field the next question, I am going to just transfer over to the contact information. Sarah and Emma's information is here. If you would like to reach out directly to either, I'm sure they're welcome to
Absolutely.
take any emails or questions that way. Also, if you are interested in learning more about the platform or wish to schedule a personal demo, you feel free to contact me. My contact information is there as well, and I can connect you either directly with Montana or Emma as appropriate for that. We did have a question about if other states were, if basically the person's asking if their state was interested in leveraging a similar system, how does that get handled?
So I think that is
basically with the licensing. I think so. So I'll kind of field that one quickly. So if you are interested in looking into that, there's a lot, definitely we can, feel free to reach out to me at damon.knight@sitkatech.com, and I will make sure that your request gets directed either directly to Montana, who holds the license, and they're the owner of the system. But I do know that they're open to, leveraging it so other organizations and state agencies can benefit from their investment. I do have another question, but thank you for asking that. I do have another question here, is how does it work if the data changes or needs to change? Do changes need to be made to the application to work with the changes? Work if the data changes, or if the data, so basically, how does it work if what is the input in the system needs to change?
Okay, so we're talking about like data corrections?
Maybe, yeah, or data quality, maybe.
Data quality?
Yeah.
So we do have a lot of sort of interfaces for making corrections. I might just jump over here and find out. I think the most sort of like locked down data is definitely the, I'm going to sign as a site admin who can do lots of powerful things. So one of the, I think, really critical pieces of any platform is sort of your roles and permissions. I didn't get into that in too much detail, but there are definitely tiers, people who can only read, people who only have limited permissions, people who have all permissions within a certain area. So I'm logged in as the site admin who can do absolutely everything, and that is a role that at Montana DNRC is really only held by a few people in IT who aren't actually using the system, and they just have it for sort of testing and troubleshooting. Let's look at a receipt. So one of the things that came up a lot was, okay, how do we do a receipt correction, right? Because maybe you've already sent the money somewhere, maybe you've already been working with this data and now you need to change it. So there are a lot of rules around sort of who can do what. So if I am, so there's two versions here. If I were a cashier, sort of a lower level user, I would only be able to come in here and edit the target, so sort of what invoice or agreement is supposed to be going toward. A couple of the other fields in here, comment, that are a little less dangerous. And then only a few people with sort of higher level access can actually come in and change payment amounts, and change things like, you know, which sort of business unit it belongs to and that sort of thing. So there's definitely different levels of data editing and data correction ability depending on permission levels. And we haven't really addressed a need for like a bulk update necessarily in here. That's something that I think DNRC is still handling with sort of a change request to their IT division, and they would do that. But in general, we try to make sure that any changes that need to happen are happening through the front end where there are validation rules that are going to prevent you from doing something like, you know, changing the amount of a receipt to be, you know, less than the amount of money that's already been allocated and sent out to the trusts, for instance. So I hope that answered some of that question at least.
And if not, well, I do think you did a great job. So, but if it didn't get to your the exact question, feel free to follow up with us. We can, like I said, we're open to do a one-on-one demo and also answer any additional questions that may have. At this point, I think I just have one question left in queue. If there is anybody else, I think we still have time, so feel free to pose it. But one is there a limit to the number of users that can access a system, or how is that handled?
Yeah, no limit to the number of users. I mean, in terms of, this question might be coming from, right, so a lot of sort of software as a service, there's a number of seats that you can have. You know, I think since Montana holds the license here, that's not a concern. If there were some sort of cloud hosting involved, there would probably be tiers in terms of data size, but that's something that would sort of have to be worked out on a case-by-case basis. But there's definitely no limit to the number of users, and we've tried to set up the roles and permissions such that as many people as want to come in here can at least come in and view the data, even if they don't have sort of write access.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, with that, I don't have any more questions in queue, but again, thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time to do today's webcast and share all the great work that you are doing in Montana with forest lands. And Emma, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule as well to share your work with the group here. So thank you so much. Finally, I will be, we did record today's webcast. I will be posting this up on the Sitka website. I also break it down into chapters, so if you just want to visit watch a certain section or just look at only the demo, you can do so. And if there's others you'd like to share this with, you'll be getting an email from the system in about a day or two with links to this that you can just forward on to others at your organization who may find value who weren't able to attend today. But thank you so much, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, Damon.
Thank you.